I watched the hospital bed wobble as he struggled to breathe, and my heart shattered all over again. My own daughter-in-law didn't even visit, not once, while I clung to every fleeting second. But what I discovered behind my back made my blood run cold. The fluorescent lights of the hospital flickered softly, casting a cold glow over the room where my husband lay. Each shallow breath he drew sounded like it was borrowed from the air itself, fragile and fleeting. I gripped his hand, feeling the bones under my fingers, feeling the life I had known for decades slip slowly through my hands. Around us, the monitors beeped rhythmically, a cruel reminder that time was running out. My heart was pounding, but nothing prepared me for the emptiness where family should have been. I had expected my son to be here, holding my husband's hand, offering quiet words of comfort. But he was absent, busy with work excuses and phone calls. Even worse, my daughter-in-law, the one I had welcomed into our family with open arms, had refused to visit. Not a single call, not a single message. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she was busy, overwhelmed, but every rational thought collided with the ache in my chest. How could she abandon a man who had treated her like a daughter? The nurses moved around us with practiced efficiency, and I felt invisible in the whirlwind of medical routines. Each syringe, each beep of the monitors reminded me of our reality. He was slipping away, and no one seemed to care. I had spent decades trying to hold this family together, smoothing over grudges, celebrating milestones. And now, in our most vulnerable hour, my pleas for presence fell on deaf ears. I felt rage, sadness, and a deep aching loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. Then, a faint sound caught my attention, the soft shuffle of someone entering the room. My heart leapt, hoping it was my son or even her, finally realizing the urgency. But the door opened to reveal the hospital social worker, carrying a stack of forms and a polite, sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly, "but there are some matters regarding Mr. Allen's estate that need your attention." Her words landed like a hammer blow. Estate, now? With him lying like this, gasping for each breath? The cold reality struck me. Perhaps the absence of care wasn't just indifference. Maybe it was something deeper, something I wasn't seeing yet. I stared down at his frail hand, the veins like rivers beneath the skin, and the hospital smell of antiseptic and despair filling my nostrils. My husband, my partner of 40 years, had built a life, a family, a home, and now it felt like everything was unraveling in a single cruel instant. I thought of my daughter-in-law again, her absence gnawing at me. Why would someone who was supposed to love or at least respect this man who had welcomed her, turn away? My mind churned with every interaction I had ever witnessed between them. There had been tension, yes, small spats, but nothing to justify this cold neglect. Then a memory flashed unbidden, the day she had moved into our home after her marriage. I had baked her favorite pie, set up the guest room, and tried my best to make her feel welcome. I had listened patiently as she talked about her dreams, her career, her family, everything. And yet, somehow, all that effort seemed meaningless now. My heart ached with the bitter taste of betrayal. Was it possible that behind her polite smile, behind her soft words, there was a hidden agenda I had never suspected? The social worker handed me the forms, and I tried to focus, tried to comprehend the words. Power of attorney, will, beneficiaries. I had always known that family dynamics could be complicated, but seeing it spelled out on paper, with names and signatures, made my stomach twist. Each line hinted at secrets, choices made without my knowledge, decisions that affected the man I loved more than life itself. My hands trembled as I signed my name, aware that every stroke of the pen was entangled with uncertainty and fear. I left the hospital briefly to clear my head. Wandering the cold corridors, each echo of my footsteps amplifying the tension in my chest, I could hear laughter and chatter from visiting families, a cruel contrast to the silence that had swallowed our room. How could love and neglect coexist so brutally in the same building, the same hour, the same life? I pressed my forehead against the window, looking out at the gray sky, feeling helpless, angry, and desperate all at once. When I returned, my husband's eyes were half closed, the effort to open them exhausting. I whispered his name, felt the warmth of his hand in mine, and promised him, silently, that I would uncover the truth. Something told me that his absence of speech, his frailty, and her absence were all connected. There was more beneath the surface, hidden behind polite smiles and family rituals. And in that moment, a determination settled within me, cold and unwavering. I would find out what she had done behind my back. I didn't know where to start. My son's evasive texts offered no clarity, only frustration. I considered speaking to other family members, but every conversation risked exposing tensions I wasn't ready to confront. It was like walking through a minefield, each step uncertain, each word a potential spark. My thoughts circled endlessly, trying to piece together the puzzle, trying to imagine how someone I trusted could have orchestrated such absence, such betrayal. And then, late that evening, as the sun cast its last orange glow through the hospital windows, I noticed something odd. A small envelope had been slipped under my husband's pillow. I picked it up, heart racing, fingertips brushing the soft paper. There was no return address, no indication of sender, only my husband's name and my heart pounding with questions. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Whoever had left it knew it would reach me. And in that moment, I realized this envelope could be the first clue to unraveling the truth about her absence, the secret she had kept from all of us, and the betrayal that had been quietly unfolding behind my back. I held the envelope in my hands as if it were both a lifeline and a warning. The hospital's antiseptic air seemed to thicken around me, every breath a reminder of the urgency. My husband's shallow breaths echoed faintly through the room as I tore the envelope open, careful not to crumple the fragile paper inside. My eyes fell on the neatly folded letter, penned in a familiar handwriting, and a chill ran through me. This wasn't just a note, it was a message, one that would alter everything I thought I knew about her. The letter began politely, almost innocuously, as if the writer was trying to hide venom beneath courteous words. I read slowly, heart pounding, every line pulling me deeper into a world of deception I hadn't imagined existed. She had been quietly manipulating the household, carefully positioning herself to gain control of assets, influence decisions, and even dictate who visited and who didn't. My stomach twisted with anger and disbelief. How could someone who smiled at family dinners, who had laughed at birthday parties, harbor such cold calculation? A knock at the door startled me. It was a nurse bringing medication and offering a warm smile. I forced a polite nod, hiding the letter beneath my lap, careful not to reveal the storm brewing inside me. I could feel my hands trembling as I tried to focus on administering comfort to my husband. His fingers twitched weakly in mine, and I whispered reassurances even though my mind was racing. The betrayal felt heavier in that quiet, sterile room than any words could convey. I remembered the countless times I had tried to bridge the gap between us, her and I. I had invited her over for tea, offered advice when she struggled with parenting, shared family traditions and stories that had been passed down for generations. All those efforts, all those gestures of kindness, now felt like they had been repaid with deception. The thought made my chest tighten, an almost physical ache that pulsed in rhythm with the monitor's beeping. The letter revealed more than just absence. It painted a picture of deliberate exclusion. She had convinced my son that he should prioritize work over family, subtly isolating him from the hospital room. She had orchestrated the schedules of other relatives, creating an unspoken barrier that ensured she never had to show care or concern. I felt a flash of fury, but beneath it was a deeper, more painful sadness. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I missed the signs while she moved through our lives like a ghost, invisible but destructive? I glanced at my husband. His eyes fluttered open and he tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. I leaned close, straining to hear, catching fragments of his voice. He was trying to warn me, to convey something about her, about the choices she had made. I pressed his hand, urging him silently, willing him to continue, to give me the fragments I could piece together before it was too late. Every word mattered now. Every second mattered. The letter also contained details of financial transactions, secret accounts, and transfers I had never been told about. It was meticulous, precise, and chilling. She had quietly redirected funds, siphoned resources, and made plans that ensured she would gain control, regardless of my husband's wishes. My head spun with the implications. This wasn't negligence or indifference, it was calculated betrayal, and I had unknowingly allowed her to gain ground while I focused on caregiving and maintaining the fragile harmony of the family. I felt a mixture of disbelief and resolve. The room, dimly lit by the hospital's evening glow, seemed to shrink around me. I realized that I could not let this go. I had to act, and I had to act carefully. My husband's condition meant time was slipping away, and the clock was ticking not just on his life, but on the opportunity to secure what was rightfully his, and, by extension, what was rightfully ours. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on my shoulders, but beneath it was a spark, a flicker of determination that refused to die. Later that night, after my husband had been stabilized and the hospital quieted, I sat in the waiting area, staring at the letter again. The words seemed to jump off the page with new clarity in the dim light. Each revelation connected dots I hadn't even known existed. Why she had avoided visits, why she had been evasive on calls, why my son seemed distracted and uneasy. The puzzle pieces fell into place, painting a portrait of manipulation so subtle it had gone unnoticed for months. My chest tightened again, this time with a mix of grief and righteous anger. I knew I needed proof. Words on a page weren't enough. I had to see the transactions, the transfers, the hidden intentions. The thought of confronting her directly terrified me, but I understood that silence was a luxury I could no longer afford. The hospital, the monitors, my husband's fading strength, all of it demanded action. I resolved to uncover every hidden detail, to document every maneuver, and to ensure that justice, no matter how delayed, would be served. And as I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, I made a silent vow to my husband. I would not allow this betrayal to stand. I would uncover the truth about what she had done behind my back, and I would protect the family and the man I loved. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with confrontation and heartbreak, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not remain passive any longer. The next morning, the hospital corridors felt colder than ever. I walked past rooms filled with visitors and laughter, but every sound felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I clutched the letter tightly in my purse, as if carrying it closer to my body could shield me from the storm it had unleashed. My husband's fragile breathing haunted every step, and I felt an urgency that pressed on my chest like a weight I could not lift. Time was no longer my ally. Every moment she stayed hidden from scrutiny gave her more room to maneuver. I returned to his room to find him awake, eyes weak but aware. I leaned close, speaking in soft whispers, telling him I would uncover the truth. He squeezed my hand faintly, his eyes glistening with tears, but there was a flicker of relief there too. For all the fear, all the betrayal, he had known someone in his corner, someone who refused to let deceit win. I noticed the faintest tremor of a smile, and my heart clenched with a mix of hope and sorrow. The first step, I decided, was to trace her financial moves. I contacted the family lawyer, a woman I had trusted for years, explaining my concerns in careful terms. At first, she hesitated, reminding me that privacy laws were strict and that accusations required proof. But I insisted, invoking my husband's fragile condition and the urgency of understanding the estate's true status. She agreed to guide me, her tone shifting from professional caution to a quiet intensity that matched my own. Together, we began to map the maze of hidden accounts, transfers, and transactions that had been carried out with almost surgical precision. As we dug deeper, the extent of her planning became horrifyingly clear. She had set up accounts under slightly altered names, redirected payments, and subtly convinced other family members that these were routine matters. My son had unknowingly played along, influenced by her half-truths and selective framing of events. The betrayal was not only deliberate, it was methodical. I felt a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. The woman I had welcomed as family, the person I had tried to nurture and include, had been quietly working against us all. Despite the mounting evidence, I felt a pang of fear. Confrontation was inevitable, but I had no desire for a scene that would shatter my husband further. He was already fighting for every breath, every heartbeat. I had to be careful, precise, strategic. Every call I made, every document I requested, had to be measured, calculated, and shielded from her knowledge. The stakes were higher than I could have imagined, and I felt the gravity of responsibility press harder on me with every passing hour. Meanwhile, my husband's condition worsened. I stayed by his side, brushing his thinning hair, adjusting his blankets, whispering words of comfort he could barely hear. Each shallow breath, each faint movement of his fingers, reminded me of why I had to continue, why I could not falter. The betrayal was no longer just an abstract idea. It was a living threat, undermining the life he had built, the legacy he had nurtured. I felt anger rising in my chest, but beneath it was a deep, unwavering determination. She would not succeed. Late that evening, the hospital was quiet. The soft hum of machines filled the silence as I sat beside his bed, reading over the letter again. There were small notations in the margins, dates, amounts, references to legal forms that I had overlooked in my initial reading. It was as if the letter had been a breadcrumb trail, carefully leaving clues for me to discover, testing whether I was paying attention. I traced each line with my finger, my mind racing, connecting dots, and imagining the quiet cruelty behind each calculated move. I realized something chilling. She had counted on me being too distracted by caregiving, too overwhelmed by fear and grief to notice. Her absence wasn't neglect. It was strategy. I felt a cold fury settle deep inside me, the kind that comes when injustice is laid bare. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from the sheer intensity of emotion. Betrayal had a face now, and it was staring directly at me through the meticulous schemes she had orchestrated. That night, I made a plan. I would gather every document, every bank statement, every fragment of evidence I could find. I would piece together a picture so complete that her manipulation would be undeniable. But I also knew I had to protect my husband, to shield him from the stress and shock of knowing the full extent of the deceit while his body fought to survive. I whispered a quiet promise to him, my voice breaking with emotion, that I would handle it, that I would ensure the truth prevailed, that justice would be served. Days passed, each one a tense, delicate dance. My husband drifted in and out of consciousness, and I remained by his side, a silent sentinel. The social worker visited frequently, offering gentle guidance and support, unaware of the storm building beneath the surface. I felt the weight of every secret, every betrayal, pressing on me like a tide that refused to ebb. Yet with each revelation, each small discovery, a spark of hope flickered. I could fight this. I could reclaim what was being taken, not just for my husband, but for the integrity of our family. Then, one morning, as the sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, a breakthrough came. The lawyer called, her voice low and urgent. She had traced one of the hidden accounts, the one my daughter-in-law had been most careful to conceal. It contained transactions that were not only suspicious but blatantly deceptive. The proof was there, undeniable and precise. My hands shook as I listened, a mixture of relief and fury flooding through me. At last, I had the leverage I needed, the evidence that would expose her manipulations once and for all. I returned to the hospital room with the documents in hand, my husband's eyes opening briefly as I approached. I laid the papers on the bed, brushing his hand gently. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his gaze, and squeezed my hand weakly. In that moment, I felt a deep, resonant connection, a shared resolve that we would see this through together. The betrayal had been revealed, but justice was still possible, and I would not rest until it was achieved. The hospital was quieter than usual that evening. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. I sat beside my husband's bed, the stack of documents trembling slightly in my hands. Each page felt heavier than the last, carrying the weight of betrayal, secrecy, and manipulation. I carefully organized the evidence, knowing that the moment of confrontation would come soon, and I needed every detail crystal clear. Every misstep could cost us more than money. It could further wound a man already fighting for his life. I glanced at him, lying so still beneath the thin hospital sheets, and I felt a pang of grief. How had it come to this? The man who had built a life around honesty, family, and trust was now vulnerable, deceived by someone I had once welcomed as family. My chest tightened as I brushed back his thinning hair, noticing the way his eyes flickered open briefly. I whispered softly, "I'll handle this. I promise." His lips twitched slightly as if he understood, as if he was telling me to be strong in his place, to fight for the truth that he no longer had the strength to defend himself. That night, after the nurses had finished their rounds and the hospital settled into a fragile silence, I began making discreet calls. I contacted the bank, requesting detailed transaction histories linked to the accounts in question. I spoke to colleagues of my daughter-in-law, subtly gathering information without revealing my full intentions. Every word, every inquiry had to be measured. She was clever, and I knew that any hint of suspicion could alert her. The stakes were high. She had been operating in shadows for months, and now I had to move carefully to illuminate every hidden corner of her plan. As I worked, my mind drifted back to her absence, to the countless hours I had watched my husband gasp for breath while she remained conspicuously absent. The memory stung like salt in a wound. Each skipped visit, each ignored call, was no accident. It was part of the design. I felt a mix of anger and sorrow so intense it made my hands shake. But beneath it was a deep, quiet determination. I would ensure that her careful manipulation could no longer continue. She had underestimated me, underestimated my love for my husband, underestimated my resolve. Days blurred into nights as I pieced together the evidence. I discovered hidden payments, unexplained transfers, and forged signatures, all carefully calculated to appear legitimate. Each revelation made my blood boil, but it also strengthened my resolve. I documented everything meticulously, creating a clear trail that could not be ignored. The closer I got to the truth, the more I understood the depth of her betrayal. She had not only ignored my husband in his dying moments, but had sought to seize control of everything he had built, twisting family bonds into tools for her own gain. Amid the chaos, I kept my attention on my husband. I brushed his hair, adjusted his blankets, and whispered memories of our life together, small fragments of warmth in a room overshadowed by betrayal. I could feel him slipping further into weakness, and it terrified me. I was afraid that if he passed before the truth was revealed, she would have the power to rewrite history, to cast herself as a caring daughter-in-law while hiding the full scope of her manipulation. That thought spurred me on, fueling a determination that refused to waver. One evening, as I reviewed the documents, I noticed something I had missed before, a subtle pattern in her transfers. Each one occurred after carefully scheduled absences, times when she knew I would be busy caring for my husband, ensuring he had oxygen, water, and comfort. It was calculated, premeditated, almost surgical. A sense of fury mixed with disbelief rose in my chest. She had been orchestrating this betrayal in the shadows, counting on my attention being elsewhere. Every skipped visit, every polite excuse had been a deliberate move in her hidden game. I realized then that confrontation would not be simple. This was not just about proving her intentions. It was about protecting my husband, ensuring that the truth could be revealed in a way that would hold up against her careful planning. I needed witnesses, documentation, and a strategy. The hospital room became my war room. The documents spread like a battlefield map before me. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but beneath it, a fire of determination burned bright. That night, I sat beside my husband, reading quietly from one of his favorite poems to distract myself from the swirling anger and sorrow. His fingers twitched faintly as he listened, eyes half closed. I wondered if he knew deep down that I was beginning to unravel the full extent of her deceit. I felt the faintest squeeze of his hand, a silent connection, a shared understanding. It was as if he were telling me to be careful, to move with purpose, to let truth guide me in the coming confrontation. Then, unexpectedly, a message arrived from a source I had not anticipated, a former colleague of my daughter-in-law, discreetly reaching out. They had noticed unusual behavior, financial irregularities, and subtle manipulations within the family. Their information, though fragmented, added another layer of clarity to the picture I was building. It confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Her absence from the hospital, her careful management of information, and her covert control over finances were all part of a single, deliberate plan. With this new confirmation, my resolve solidified. I could no longer hesitate, no longer allow myself to be guided solely by fear or grief. The evidence was mounting, the pattern undeniable, and the moment for action was approaching. I would confront her, but not recklessly. I would reveal every hidden move, expose every manipulation, and ensure that the betrayal she had orchestrated could not stand. My husband's legacy, our family's truth, demanded it. As I sat there, the hum of the hospital machines filling the quiet room, I felt the first real spark of hope in days. The battle ahead would be difficult, painful, and emotionally exhausting. But I knew I could face it. For my husband, for the truth, and for the family she had tried to manipulate, I would see this through. And in that quiet, determined moment, I understood something profound. Betrayal may hide in shadows, but truth, once pursued relentlessly, always finds a way to shine. The following morning, I returned to the hospital with renewed purpose. The cold sterility of the corridors no longer intimidated me. They had become a path toward uncovering the truth. I carried the folder of evidence like a shield, each document a weapon against the quiet betrayal that had haunted our lives. My husband lay in his bed, still fragile, eyes flickering open as I approached. I held his hand, whispering soft reassurances, letting him feel that his fight was not alone, that our battle extended beyond his weakened body. I realized I had to be strategic. Confronting my daughter-in-law directly in the hospital would be reckless. She was clever, always 2 steps ahead, and any hint of suspicion might push her to hide even further. I needed allies, people who could corroborate the truth and lend weight to my claims. The lawyer was one, the former colleague was another, but I also needed internal confirmation, someone close who could testify to her presence, or rather, her deliberate absence. Each piece of the puzzle had to be precise, irrefutable, undeniable. Hours passed, and my husband drifted in and out of consciousness. I read quietly from his favorite book, reciting the stories he had shared with me when he was well, trying to anchor both of us in the past while preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The beeping monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the faint shuffle of nurses became background noise, secondary to the storm building in my heart. I could feel my resolve hardening with each passing moment. The betrayal was personal, deep, and cruel, but it would not win. Late in the afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was a distant relative, someone who had quietly observed our family's dynamics for years. Their voice trembled slightly as they revealed what they had noticed: suspicious withdrawals, evasive behavior, unexplained excuses for absences. They spoke carefully, almost as if afraid of repercussions, but their testimony confirmed the pattern I had been tracing. My daughter-in-law had been meticulous, methodical, and manipulative, every move calculated to avoid detection. A wave of fury washed over me, but I tempered it with calm. Anger alone would not suffice. I needed clarity, precision, and evidence. I began documenting everything meticulously, organizing the testimony, the documents, the patterns of absence, and the financial irregularities. Every piece of information, no matter how small, added to the mosaic of deception. I realized that confronting her was not just about exposing wrongdoing. It was about reclaiming what was ours, protecting my husband's legacy, and restoring the integrity of our family. That night, I returned to the hospital room, exhausted but determined. My husband's breathing was shallower than before, yet his eyes still held a flicker of recognition and trust. I leaned close, whispering the fragments of what I had uncovered, careful not to overwhelm him. Even in his weakened state, I felt his silent encouragement. He trusted me to carry the burden of truth, to navigate the treacherous path she had laid out, and to see justice done. The weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on me, but beneath it was a fierce, unwavering determination. The next day, I took a bold step. I reached out to a bank representative with whom I had developed a discreet rapport. I explained the situation in careful, measured terms, emphasizing the urgency and potential wrongdoing without revealing too much. The representative responded with professionalism and discretion, agreeing to provide detailed transaction histories, flagged activities, and any irregularities that could be traced. The first concrete signs of her manipulation were emerging, and with them, the possibility of confronting her with indisputable proof. I returned to the hospital room with a folder now bulging with evidence. The weight of it in my hands felt symbolic, a tangible representation of the betrayal she had orchestrated, now countered by the relentless pursuit of truth. My husband's eyes followed my movements, and I felt a quiet connection, a shared understanding that we were reclaiming control. I whispered softly, "We're closer now. I see it, I understand it, and soon justice will follow." His fingers twitched weakly in response, a faint signal that he trusted me completely. As evening fell, I sat alone with the documents, tracing her patterns, connecting the absences with financial activity and subtle manipulations. The meticulous care she had taken to hide her actions was impressive, if it weren't so infuriating. Every skipped visit, every polite excuse, every diverted conversation had been calculated. She had treated our family like a chessboard, moving pieces to her advantage while I had been too distracted by care and love to notice. And yet, now armed with evidence, I could counter her moves with precision. I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection, remembering the life we had built, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the small daily joys, and contrasting it with the cold, calculated deception I now confronted. The juxtaposition made my heart ache, but it also strengthened my resolve. I would not allow her to erase decades of trust and love. The family we had nurtured, the legacy of honesty and care, would not be stolen under the guise of politeness and manipulation. Then, as night settled over the hospital, I made my first concrete plan of action. I would present the evidence to my son, carefully, without inflaming tensions. I would gather all necessary witnesses, documents, and confirmations to ensure that the betrayal could be revealed in a way that could not be dismissed or deflected. The confrontation would be strategic, precise, and undeniable. For my husband, for our family, and for the truth, I knew that I had to act. And as I rested my head briefly against the chair, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real, that justice was finally within reach. The next morning, sunlight spilled weakly across the hospital floor, illuminating the quiet urgency that had settled around my husband's bed. I held the folder of evidence tightly, flipping through pages as though tracing a path toward justice. Each line of transaction, every note, every documented absence painted a clearer picture of her manipulation. I felt a simmering mix of anger and determination, my heart tightening with every revelation. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was tangible, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. I glanced at my husband. He was awake, eyes blinking slowly as he tried to focus on my face. I leaned close, whispering softly, "I see it now, and I'll make it right." His fingers moved weakly in response, a silent acknowledgement that he trusted me to navigate the treacherous terrain she had created. I could see a flicker of relief in his eyes, as if he finally knew someone was actively protecting the life and legacy he had built with his own hands. That small connection gave me strength I hadn't realized I needed. I decided it was time to approach my son. I called him quietly, ensuring the line was secure, and spoke carefully, trying to balance truth and caution. I outlined concerns without revealing the full evidence yet, gauging his reactions. At first, he was defensive, insisting that she had been helping, that her absences were justified, and that he didn't see any manipulation. But I pressed gently, carefully, asking questions about specific dates, transfers, and the patterns I had documented. Slowly, a shadow of doubt crossed his face, and I knew the seed of realization had been planted. Later that day, I visited the bank once more, armed with a clear list of questions. The representative guided me through transactions I had not yet understood, highlighting subtle anomalies, slight variations in signatures, and timing that aligned perfectly with her absences from the hospital. Each discovery tightened the knot of anger and disbelief in my chest, but it also illuminated a clear path forward. The evidence was growing, forming a chain that could not be broken, and with it, the possibility of confronting her with irrefutable truth. Back in the hospital room, I spread the documents across the small table by my husband's bed. His eyes followed my movements, weak but attentive, and I whispered the developments in fragments, careful not to overwhelm him. I could see recognition flicker in his gaze, a silent validation that I was uncovering exactly what he had feared. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but I felt a surge of determination. I was no longer just a bystander. I was the guardian of truth, charged with exposing betrayal and protecting a family's legacy. As evening approached, I reflected on the absence of my daughter-in-law, the silence that had dominated the hospital room. Each skipped visit, every polite excuse now made sense in the light of the evidence. It was calculated, intentional, and cruel. The realization stung deeply, but it also strengthened my resolve. She had underestimated me, counted on distraction, and relied on my compassion to shield her from scrutiny. But the veil had lifted and I could see her actions clearly. Her strategy, once hidden, was now vulnerable to exposure. The following days became a delicate balance of care and investigation. I remained by my husband's side, ensuring he was comfortable, while simultaneously piecing together the full extent of her deception. I spoke discreetly to other family members, gathering corroboration without revealing too much. Every step was carefully calculated, each move designed to strengthen the foundation of truth I was constructing. The tension was palpable, but with each small victory, a sense of progress grew, infusing me with hope amidst the exhaustion. Late one night, as the hospital descended into quiet, I reviewed a stack of financial statements that detailed her transactions. The pattern was undeniable. Transfers timed precisely with her absence, withdrawals strategically obscured, and deliberate misdirection in conversations with other family members. The methodical nature of her actions revealed not just greed, but a level of manipulation I had not imagined. Each detail fueled my anger, but it also crystallized my purpose. The confrontation would come, and it would leave no room for denial. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute, letting my gaze fall on my husband. Even in his weakened state, there was a silent communication between us, a shared understanding of what needed to be done. I whispered a promise once more, softly, almost reverently, that I would see this through, that the betrayal would not succeed, and that justice would prevail. His fingers twitched faintly, a small gesture, but one that carried the weight of decades of love and trust. The next morning, I felt a shift. With the evidence compiled and allies discreetly lined up, the path forward was becoming clearer. I would confront her, but not with anger alone. I would present facts, timelines, and documentation so precise that denial would be impossible. It would be strategic, deliberate, and unyielding. And as I watched my husband rest, fragile yet trusting, I felt a deep sense of resolve. The journey was far from over, but the first moves toward justice had been made. The following day, I arrived at the hospital with a quiet resolve that felt almost physical. The folder of evidence had grown, thick with documentation, timelines, and corroborating statements. I felt its weight not just in my hands but in my chest, as though the responsibility of exposing the betrayal rested squarely on my shoulders. My husband lay in bed, weak but alert, his eyes tracking my movements with a faint flicker of recognition and trust. I squeezed his hand gently, letting him know that I was ready to take the next steps, to fight for the truth that had been denied him. I knew the confrontation with my daughter-in-law had to be strategic. Any sudden accusation could send her into a defensive spiral, making it harder to reclaim control and ensure justice. I decided to bring my son into the circle first. Carefully, I outlined the evidence I had uncovered, omitting the most sensitive details until he could fully grasp the context. At first, he resisted, still believing in her innocence, still clinging to the idea that absence was harmless or circumstantial. But as I walked him through timelines, documented transactions, and eyewitness accounts, his face changed. Confusion gave way to doubt, and doubt edged into shock. Later that afternoon, I contacted a few extended family members I trusted. Their eyes widened as I shared the discrepancies, the patterns, and the manipulations I had documented. They murmured quietly, a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, understanding for the first time how carefully the betrayal had been orchestrated. My daughter-in-law's absence from the hospital, her avoidance of conversations, and her subtle control of household affairs now formed a coherent, undeniable narrative. Each witness added credibility. Each detail strengthened the chain of proof. I felt the first stirrings of confidence, knowing that the moment of reckoning was approaching. Back in the hospital room, I spread the documents across the small table beside my husband's bed. His fingers brushed over the papers faintly as if he were lending me his strength. I whispered softly, recounting the evidence in fragments, careful not to overwhelm him. His eyes glimmered with understanding, and a subtle, almost imperceptible nod reassured me. He trusted me to see this through, and in that trust, I found courage I hadn't known I possessed. I realized then that this was no longer just a fight for justice. It was a sacred duty to protect his legacy and the family he had nurtured. That evening, I took a deep breath and drafted a clear, precise outline of the confrontation. Every point had to be documented, every question anticipated, every denial anticipated and countered with evidence. She would have no room to manipulate, no space to twist facts. The meticulous planning that had characterized her betrayal now became the blueprint for exposing it. I reviewed every transaction, every absentee date, and every corroborating witness statement, ensuring that nothing was left vague, nothing left open to interpretation. In the quiet moments beside my husband's bed, I reflected on the contrast between her calculated absence and my relentless presence. Every skipped visit, every polite excuse, had been a strategy to isolate him and gain control. And yet, despite all her planning, her actions had created a vulnerability, a trail of evidence so precise that the truth could not be hidden. I felt a mixture of grief and resolve. She had underestimated the power of observation, the depth of care, and the strength of love that had kept me at my husband's side through illness and betrayal alike. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and the corridors emptied, I reviewed the compiled evidence one final time. I traced patterns, marked timelines, and rehearsed the words I would use. Every small detail mattered. The confrontation had to be deliberate, calm, and backed by irrefutable proof. I whispered once more to my husband, "I'm ready. We'll see this through together." His hand twitched faintly in response, a silent signal of trust and shared resolve. I could almost feel his strength passing to me, lending courage and clarity for what was to come. The next morning, I spoke to the hospital staff discreetly, ensuring that no one outside the trusted circle would interfere. I wanted the environment controlled, safe, and conducive to revealing the truth. Even the smallest distraction could jeopardize the delicate balance we had maintained. Each conversation, each request, each phone call was carefully considered, a move in the strategic unfolding of the plan to confront her. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but I carried it with purpose, knowing that the consequences of inaction were far worse. By midday, the moment approached. My son, now fully aware of the situation, was prepared to support me. The family members I had briefed were discreetly on alert, ready to provide testimony if needed. Every detail had been accounted for, every potential deflection anticipated. I felt a tense anticipation, my heart pounding, but beneath it, an unwavering determination. The betrayal could no longer remain hidden, and the moment to illuminate her deception was at hand. As I sat beside my husband, holding his hand, I whispered softly, "The truth is coming. Justice will follow, and this will end with clarity and fairness." He gave a faint squeeze, a gesture that carried the weight of decades of trust, love, and mutual respect. That small touch renewed my resolve, steeling me for the confrontation ahead. She had operated in shadows for months, but now, in the quiet hospital room with witnesses, documentation, and the support of family, the moment of reckoning was approaching, and I was ready. The afternoon sun poured through the hospital blinds, painting long stripes across the floor as I prepared myself for the confrontation that had been months in the making. My husband lay in bed, fragile but alert, eyes flicking toward me with a faint spark of hope. I took a deep breath, steadying the trembling in my hands, knowing that what I was about to do could change everything. The folder of evidence rested beside me, heavy with proof of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. Each page a testament to the careful orchestration of someone I had once trusted. I called my son into the room first. He arrived quietly, concern etched across his face, the weight of realization settling in his eyes. I laid out the documents one by one, explaining the patterns, the transfers, and the absences. His expression shifted from disbelief to shock, then to a quiet anger that mirrored my own. The realization that his wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, had manipulated him and his family struck him hard. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way he clenched his hands, trying to reconcile the truth with the woman he had known. Then, with careful timing, I invited the other family members I had discreetly briefed. Their presence lent weight to the revelations, each confirmation of irregularities and suspicious behavior reinforcing the truth. Together, we formed a quiet, determined circle around the bed, each piece of evidence laid bare, each discrepancy highlighted, each manipulation exposed. My daughter-in-law had no allies in that room, and that absence of support made her power suddenly vulnerable, her carefully constructed defenses fragile under the weight of proof. Finally, the moment came to summon her. She arrived, polite and unsuspecting, wearing the same practiced smile she had used to conceal months of deception. I met her gaze calmly, unflinching, and placed the documents before her. Her smile faltered slightly as her eyes scanned the pages, hesitation flickering across her face. I saw the first cracks in her composure, the beginning of awareness that her carefully orchestrated plans were unraveling. For the first time, she had no script, no control, no escape from the weight of undeniable truth. I spoke slowly, clearly, ensuring every word carried the gravity it deserved. I outlined the timeline of her absences, the carefully timed transfers, the subtle manipulations that had isolated my husband and influenced my son. Each statement was backed by documentation, each claim corroborated by witnesses. I watched her face closely, noting the flicker of panic, the tightness in her jaw, the rapid glance at each corroborating family member. The evidence was indisputable, the truth unavoidable. My husband's eyes followed the exchange weakly but intently, a flicker of pride and relief passing through his gaze. He squeezed my hand ever so slightly, silently signaling his trust in me, in the justice I was bringing to light. I felt a surge of determination, the culmination of months of careful observation, investigation, and planning. I could see the moral arc of the situation bending toward justice, and it strengthened my resolve. The betrayal had been deliberate, cruel, and calculated, but it could no longer succeed. Her voice trembled as she attempted to speak, to justify, to deflect, but every word was met with calm documentation, evidence that left no room for evasion. The careful manipulation she had relied upon for months collapsed under the weight of facts, timelines, and corroboration. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was unfolding, sadness at the depth of betrayal from someone who had once been welcomed into our lives. But most of all, I felt resolve. The truth, patient and relentless, had finally caught up with deception. The confrontation stretched on, tense and quiet, with the hospital monitors ticking softly in the background. I maintained a calm authority, letting the evidence speak louder than any accusation or anger. Slowly, the room shifted from tension to clarity. My son's presence, the family witnesses, and the careful documentation left her no space to twist reality. Every subtle smile, every polite excuse, every absence had been accounted for, cataloged, and revealed. She could no longer hide behind manipulation or silence. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, a silence fell. Her composure crumbled, the mask of civility slipping away. She had been exposed, not through anger or confrontation alone, but through the relentless pursuit of truth and meticulous preparation. My husband's weak, frail hand rested lightly on mine, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet understanding. Together, we had navigated betrayal, uncovered deception, and restored a measure of moral justice. That night, as the hospital settled into quiet, I sat beside my husband, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Relief and exhaustion intermingled within me. The confrontation had ended, the truth revealed, and the family's integrity preserved. Yet the weight of months of hidden betrayal lingered, reminding me that vigilance, love, and careful attention were necessary to protect those we cherish. In that moment, I understood that even in moments of deep pain and betrayal, patience, observation, and courage could restore balance and truth. The following morning, the hospital was bathed in a soft golden light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a cautious sense of calm. The confrontation had passed, yet the lingering tension remained, like the aftershock of an earthquake. My husband lay quietly, breathing steadily, and I sat beside him, gently holding his hand. The weight of months of worry, betrayal, and secrecy seemed to ease slightly. But I knew that even though the immediate confrontation had ended, the aftermath, the process of repairing trust, ensuring accountability, and protecting the family, was just beginning. I turned my attention to my son, who now walked the fine line between grief and clarity. The shock of learning the truth had left him shaken, but there was also a new resolve in his eyes. He had seen the extent of her manipulations, the evidence that proved deception at every turn. We spoke quietly, carefully, mapping out the next steps. His support was unwavering, and in that moment I realized how essential it was to have him aligned with the truth. Together we began planning how to secure accounts, ensure legal protection, and prevent any further attempts to obscure or manipulate our family's legacy. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law avoided our eyes, hovering near the periphery, a mixture of shame and defiance evident in her posture. I noticed her attempts at justification, the faint trembling in her hands, the way her gaze flickered toward my husband as if searching for forgiveness that could not be freely given. I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at her betrayal, sorrow for the divide she had caused, and an almost maternal desire to ensure that the resolution preserved dignity without collapsing into further cruelty. Justice, I realized, did not need to be loud. It only needed to be precise. Throughout the day, I worked quietly with the lawyer and the witnesses, ensuring that every piece of evidence was accounted for, documented, and prepared for potential legal or family mediation. The meticulous work, which had once felt overwhelming, now brought clarity and purpose. Each confirmed transaction, each corroborated absence, and each documented manipulation reinforced the truth. We were not acting out of revenge, but out of necessity, to restore fairness, to protect my husband, and to preserve the integrity of the family he had built over decades. By evening, my husband's breathing had grown steadier, his fragile body seeming to sense a sense of resolution in the air. I brushed back his hair, adjusted his blankets, and whispered softly, recounting the events of the day in a calm, gentle voice. His eyes flickered open briefly, a faint smile touching his lips. He didn't need to speak. I understood. In that small gesture, he was acknowledging not only the betrayal that had occurred, but also the dedication, love, and relentless determination that had brought the truth to light. The next few days were a careful balance of care, reflection, and preparation for the family meetings ahead. I maintained my presence at my husband's side, tending to his needs while quietly organizing the documentation, timelines, and corroborating statements. Each conversation, each action was deliberate, measured, and intentional. I understood that the confrontation had exposed the deception, but the restoration of trust and protection of the family's legacy required patience, clarity, and continued vigilance. One evening, a quiet visitor arrived, a distant family member who had remained largely unaware of the hidden manipulations until now. They expressed shock and sorrow at the revelations, yet their presence reinforced the truth and provided additional support. We reviewed the timeline together, confirming details and ensuring that no gap in evidence remained. The meticulous corroboration strengthened our position, and I felt a sense of cautious optimism that the path toward justice was clear, though not without emotional complexity. Late that night, as the hospital settled into stillness, I sat beside my husband, letting the quiet envelop us. I reflected on the journey, the betrayal, the manipulation, the meticulous planning required to uncover the truth. Every sleepless night, every whispered conversation, every careful observation had led to this point. And yet I knew the story was not yet complete. Healing, accountability, and moral justice would continue to unfold, and I would remain vigilant to ensure that the family's integrity endured. The following morning, I felt a sense of readiness. The confrontation had shown us the truth. The evidence had spoken for itself. But there were still decisions to be made, family dynamics to navigate, and ways to rebuild trust while ensuring that such deception could never take root again. I knew that the journey ahead required patience, strategy, and unwavering attention. Yet for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. The betrayal, though deep and painful, had been illuminated, and the path toward justice was finally visible. As I watched my husband rest, his breathing steady and calm, I felt a profound sense of responsibility and purpose. We had uncovered the truth, and now we would ensure that it led to fairness, accountability, and healing. The storm of deception had passed, but the work of restoration had just begun. And in that quiet moment, I understood something fundamental. Truth, patience, and unwavering love could pierce even the deepest betrayal, restoring balance and moral clarity to those who sought it. The following days were quiet but tense, a delicate rhythm of hospital care and family discussions. Each morning, I arrived at my husband's bedside, noting the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the faint color in his cheeks, the fragile flutter of his fingers as he grasped mine. Even in his weakened state, there was an awareness in his eyes, a recognition of the progress we had made in exposing the betrayal and reclaiming control. The folder of evidence lay nearby, now organized into a precise sequence, ready for any legal or familial discussions that might arise. I spent hours with my son and trusted family members, carefully explaining the documents, the patterns of deceit, and the corroborating witnesses. Every detail mattered. The timing of absences, the manipulated financial transfers, the subtle but consistent manipulation of household affairs. We worked slowly, ensuring that no one could later dispute the narrative we had meticulously reconstructed. My daughter-in-law remained present, subdued and quiet, her earlier composure replaced with visible discomfort. Her calculated confidence had crumbled, leaving her exposed to the full weight of accountability. Amid the tense discussions, I remained focused on my husband. Though frail, his presence provided both guidance and motivation. He would squeeze my hand faintly when a point needed emphasis, or nod subtly when I summarized a particularly troubling piece of evidence. Even in his weakened state, he was a quiet force of moral clarity, reinforcing the path we had set and reminding me that our goal was justice, not vengeance. Each small gesture renewed my resolve, underscoring the importance of balancing accountability with compassion. One afternoon, as we reviewed the timeline yet again, a startling realization emerged. Some of her manipulations extended beyond mere financial control. There were subtle attempts to influence extended family members, to sow doubt and division, and to present herself as the caring daughter-in-law who had merely been misunderstood. The meticulous orchestration of deception had been broader than I had initially imagined. My anger surged, tempered by a need for calm precision. Every move she had made now formed part of a complete narrative, a blueprint of her manipulation, ready to be revealed in its entirety. I realized then that restoration would require both confrontation and guidance. The family needed clarity, reassurance, and careful management to prevent further harm. I began drafting plans for how to communicate the truth to extended relatives, how to secure legal protections, and how to ensure that my daughter-in-law could not continue her manipulations. It was a delicate balance, a blend of firmness, evidence, and empathy, aimed at safeguarding the family while illuminating the consequences of betrayal. Throughout these days, I remained beside my husband, tending to his needs with quiet devotion. I brushed his hair, adjusted his blankets, and read softly to him, letting the familiar cadence of my voice bring comfort amidst the turbulence. His breathing grew steadier, and for the first time in weeks I felt a cautious optimism. The confrontation had been necessary, the evidence had been revealed, and now the path toward accountability and restoration was unfolding. I whispered quietly, "We've done it. The truth is out, and justice is beginning." Late one evening, as the hospital fell silent, I reviewed the evidence once more. I traced her manipulations with a practiced eye, noting the consistency and precision of her deceit. Each document, each statement, each corroborating witness added to the undeniable narrative. The realization strengthened my resolve. Betrayal had been deliberate, calculated, and cruel, but with truth as my ally, I could guide the family toward resolution, ensuring that integrity and moral clarity were restored. In the quiet moments beside my husband's bed, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The months of fear, grief, and vigilance had brought us to this point. The confrontation had revealed the depth of the betrayal, but it had also illuminated a path forward. I could see the potential for healing, for accountability, and for moral justice. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of clarity, responsibility, and hope. The following morning, I felt a renewed determination. The final steps toward closure required careful navigation, thoughtful communication, and unwavering commitment to the truth. I met with the lawyer and the witnesses once more, ensuring that all documentation was complete and precise. Every potential objection had been anticipated, every defense countered with evidence. My daughter-in-law remained present, her silence a testament to the effectiveness of the preparation and the inevitability of accountability. Finally, as I sat beside my husband, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The confrontation had been executed with care, the deception had been illuminated, and the groundwork for restoration had been laid. Though the journey had been painful and fraught with uncertainty, we had navigated the betrayal with patience, determination, and love. In the quiet of the hospital room, I whispered once more to him, "The truth is here, the family is safe, and justice will follow. We've done it together." The morning sunlight spilled softly across the hospital room, bathing it in a warm, gentle glow. My husband's breathing was steady, his fragile frame resting with a calmness that had been absent for weeks. I sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the weight of the months of betrayal, investigation, and confrontation gradually lifting. The evidence had been revealed, the truth laid bare, and the family's integrity preserved. The journey had been exhausting, painful, and emotionally charged, but finally, the storm of secrecy and manipulation had passed. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who now sat quietly, her composure fractured and her previous confidence gone. The weight of her actions hung in the air like a palpable shadow. She had been confronted with irrefutable evidence, her carefully orchestrated manipulations exposed, and the family united in their understanding of the truth. I could see that she was beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what she had done, the betrayal of trust, the exploitation of absence, the deliberate undermining of love and loyalty. My son remained by my side, his expression a mixture of sorrow, understanding, and resolve. He had witnessed the full extent of her actions, the methodical deception, and the careful exposure we had orchestrated. I felt a sense of pride in him, a recognition that even amidst heartbreak, he had chosen integrity and family above convenience or denial. Together, we had navigated the treacherous path of uncovering betrayal and ensuring accountability, and now the focus shifted to healing, restoration, and cautious reconciliation. I gently brushed my husband's hair back, his fingers tightening slightly around mine in a quiet gesture of trust and connection. "It's over," I whispered softly. "The truth is out. The family is safe. Justice has been served." His eyes glimmered faintly, a small, serene smile touching his lips. Even in his weakened state, there was a profound sense of relief and pride. We had confronted betrayal with patience, diligence, and unwavering care, and we had emerged with truth and integrity intact. The following days were dedicated to rebuilding the fragile sense of normalcy that had been disrupted by months of deception. Conversations were carefully navigated, boundaries reestablished, and trust cautiously restored. I worked alongside my son and other family members to ensure that financial matters, household responsibilities, and family dynamics were transparent and secure. My daughter-in-law was held accountable, yet there was space for reflection, understanding, and potential growth. Justice, in its truest form, was not merely punishment, it was restoration and moral clarity. Throughout it all, my husband remained at the center, his presence a reminder of what had been at stake. Each day, I cared for him with unwavering attention, ensuring that his comfort, dignity, and peace were prioritized. In the quiet moments, I read to him, recounted memories of our shared life, and spoke softly of hope and renewal. The weight of betrayal had been heavy, but now, amidst restoration, there was space for healing, connection, and reflection. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the window, I gathered the family together for a final conversation. We reviewed the timeline, the evidence, and the consequences, ensuring that clarity and understanding were achieved. My daughter-in-law, subdued and reflective, listened carefully. There were no theatrics, no public shame, only acknowledgement of the truth, a recognition of responsibility, and the beginnings of a cautious reconciliation. The moral arc of the situation had bent toward justice, and it was clear that honesty, patience, and diligence had prevailed. As evening approached, I sat once more beside my husband's bed, holding his hand and feeling the profound sense of completion that had been months in the making. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable had been exposed, the family's legacy protected, and the truth preserved. In that quiet moment, I understood the depth of resilience, love, and moral fortitude that had carried us through. Betrayal may visit even the closest families, but the patient pursuit of truth and justice can restore balance, heal wounds, and illuminate the path forward. Toro. As night fell, I whispered softly to my husband, "We did it. The truth is here, justice has been served, and our family will be stronger because of it." His fingers twitched faintly, his eyes closing in a peaceful rest. I stayed by his side, feeling the culmination of our journey, the emotional highs, the painful lows, and the quiet victories of truth and integrity. In the end, the betrayal had been confronted, the deception unmasked, and the family's moral center restored. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your thoughts.